Well, we heard a lot there about the former Prime Minister Scott Morrison's actions of appointing himself to those 5 additional portfolios. As we've been reporting today, the Solicitor General's advice has found that was inconsistent with the principles of our Constitution and irresponsible, but an important point here that his decision to do so was legally valid. The SG's report did find that there was no requirement for notification of those ministry appointments, but did make the point that Parliament, of course, is unable to hold a minister accountable if the Parliament isn't aware of who the minister is. Let's bring in our political editor, Andrew Clennell. Andrew, this is really just the beginning here. We're now going to have this independent inquiry, which will get underway to look further at what happened, how it happened, and then we can expect some reforms to follow on from that to prevent it from happening again.
Well, Ash, one of the first questions I have out of this is, will Scott Morrison cooperate with this inquiry? Because you've got Anthony Albanese there saying we need to know why this happened, how it was exercised, etc., etc. Well, you haven't got a snowball's chance in hell of finding that's a bit needle in haystack-ish unless you've got Scott Morrison telling you. So that's one problem in terms of a potential inquiry. I don't think there was any ambiguity from the PM there in terms of the fact that he will be seeking a legislative remedy in relation to this to make sure it doesn't happen again. The Solicitor General gave a number of options to ensure this doesn't happen again. Clearly, the Solicitor General doesn't think it should happen again, and they could include a requirement to gazette to gazette these appointments of the Governor General and all these kind of things. But it made clear the only way to make sure that it occurred, if I read here, none of the above proposals would bind a future government. For that reason, the government might choose to entrench a requirement for the publication of appointments under Section 64 of the Constitution by creating a statutory requirement that such appointments be published. Well, that's law. That's what that requires. But I mean, let me repeat again, this most damaging finding, very helpful of the Prime Minister, wasn't it, to point us to the actual paragraphs, which were the worst for Scott Morrison. It says here, while I consider that Mr Morrison's appointment to administer the Department of Industry, Science and Energy and Resources was valid, that is not to say that the absence of any notification of that appointment to the Parliament, the public, the other ministers administering the department or the department itself was consistent with the principle of responsible government that is inherent in Chapter 2 of the Constitution. In my opinion, it was not. Well, Chapter 2 of the Constitution relates to executive government. It relates to the Prime Minister and Cabinet and the way the executive runs the country. And the Solicitor General is saying, while this was legal, it is contrary to that principle in that part of the Constitution which defines responsible government in this country.
Andrew, we heard the Prime Minister there calling on Scott Morrison to apologise to the Australian people. We know that Mr Morrison has already apologised to his colleagues who were impacted. We did also hear Anthony Albanese echo some comments from Richard Marles this morning that Mr Morrison does need to be held to account for his actions. What are the possible ways on the table to do that?
Well, I thought that was an interesting tactic too. They had Richard Marles up this morning to do the deputy's job of putting the boot in. And then Anthony Albanese came on board and he wasn't so effusive when it came to turfing Morrison out of Parliament. I guess he's suggesting Morrison could leave Parliament. He's not even committing to a censure motion, though there's little doubt in my mind Labor will move a censure motion, which is a motion of condemnation, and that would then test some of the Liberals as to whether they would cross the floor and severely embarrass Scott Morrison. But there's nothing else they can do. They won't move to expel him from Parliament. And frankly, that's something that I think, should, as bad as this is, and I think this is bad that he's done this, I think that's something that should be reserved for corruption, really, or someone who's committed some sort of crime, that you force them out of the Parliament itself. He was elected the member for Cook. He's not in the shadow ministry, so he has no position there to resign. And there's no evidence of any corruption here, or indeed illegality, Ash. It's just that it was, well, frankly, it was a bit dodgy.
There's been a lot of focus, Andrew, on the role of the Governor-General in all of this. Some people calling for the Governor-General to resign, wanting more of a focus on exactly what role he played. In this Solicitor General's report, it makes a point that the Governor-General had no discretion to refuse to accept the request from the Prime Minister. Does that mean, do you think, that the Governor-General's in the clear here? We know the Labor government in particular has been very keen to keep the Governor-General largely out of all of this.
Well, you heard a question from a journalist in there seeking to ping the Governor-General in saying the gazette's his responsibility. But if he's instructed not to gazette it, what else is he meant to do? And that's the point the Solicitor-General makes here, saying, as you just quoted, Ash, the Governor-General has no discretion to refuse to accept the Prime Minister's advice in relation to such an appointment. I think he's off the hook here, but I'll wager that in 18 months' time he won't still be the Governor-General.
Okay, big call. We'll hold you to that, Andrew.
What
about the reforms? What about the reforms? We know that you like it when that happens, Andrew. What about the reforms that we're looking at in terms of where things go to from here? It sounds like Anthony Albanese pretty much saying, look, this independent inquiry needs to happen first. They're going to be appointing someone of, I think he described it as a serious legal mind to be chairing that. And then in the end, we would expect that any reforms that go through would happen with a pretty bipartisan sense in the Parliament.
Yeah, they'll be looking for someone as quickly as they can, I would have thought. I mean, the next cabinet meeting's due in a week. I'd expect you should appoint someone by then. If it's so important and you want to come out and talk about it every day, then appoint someone to head the inquiry. There's always a bit of a search in relation to those things, but Cabinet's agreed there should be an inquiry. It should be headed by an eminent person. That person will have to be seen as not aligned to either political party and above reproach. So that may take a little time, but you'd want to get moving with that. And yes, I mean, I just think it's very clear here that you'll need a statutory requirement. Now, whether that's legislation or regulation, well, legislation, I agree with you. I think it'd pass both houses pretty easily. You've heard Peter Dutton say this shouldn't have happened, for example. If it's regulation, the Senate can always disallow it. Well, that won't be happening. But it is the last paragraph saying he outlines a number of options to Solicitor General, how you could make sure this doesn't happen again, and it shouldn't happen again, he says. And then his last suggestion is, of course, what you can do is introduce a statutory requirement. So I think we can read that as read, particularly because of the nature of the way that Anthony Albanese asked Kieran's question there when he said, yeah, I'm looking at legislation on this.
Andrew Clennell, appreciate your analysis. Thank you for that.